let's do this. Oh. I talk out. I think out loud. You guys do that?
Think whisper.
Do you think out loud?
I think whisper so no one else hears me, but I do like to muffle myself over.
Yeah, you mumble the whole time. That's what bothers me in here. Like a mouse.
I don't squeak.
Yeah, exactly. Number 5, British agents intercepted Dakota's secret message. What was that secret message?
Zimmerman telegram.
Awesome. Zimmerman telegram. And that was Germans to Mexicans, and the British intercepted it and published it, and eventually gave it to Americans to publish in March of 1917, which is just at the right time to infuriate Americans. Now, so maybe I just gave it away, but why did the British, who found this, decoded this message months before that, why did they hold on to that information? And what do you think? Do you think that was the optimum time? Would have been better earlier for their sake?
But it would risk the chance that the Americans could have done it, or tried something else.
So,
It could have risked that the Americans would have talked to Mexico instead of just going straight to, they're going to infiltrate us, we got to go now. So they might have kept it to wait until it was like the last moment. So
yeah. And it kind of makes you wonder about the British in a way. It makes you wonder, our ally, closest ally in the war, was willing to manipulate us for their benefit. And so when they found this out and it was published, that it was an outcry, and the president ought to do something, the Congress should declare war. By April, they declared war. But it didn't take very long. So I don't know if you could do it any better than that for the British to get us angry enough to declare war. Now, World War II, we declared war on Germany and Japan. And we're going to talk about that, how that was completely different circumstances. But they're also very interesting timing of those things. It's really interesting to know when we declared independence, when we declared war, why we did it at that time. So what you need to know when you are tested on this is the basic reasons why the United States came into the war at the time that it did. So it was already long-term sympathy, long-term trading partnerships, but the Lusitania unrestricted submarine warfare, which is really kind of connected there. That was the difference between the Lusitania and other ships. Was the Lusitania was not armed. It was not a defensively armed ship. It was a passenger ship. It probably was armed somewhat, but it was not a warship. And sometimes when you do history, sometimes there's conspiracies all over the place in real life. So it's not what today, when you hear conspiracy, you think, oh, someone who's crazy. That doesn't mean that. Conspiracy just means that more than one party knows what's about to happen. So that happens a lot. You know, like if I want to sell this to you, and you know now I want to sell this to you, and I'm thinking the price is $4, and you're thinking I hope it's $2, and now you guys know about that. Well, that's a conspiracy. They know, I know. You know? So, do we conspire to do it now? Fulfills the conspiracy. I think I'm going to do it for 4. Okay? 4. And she said, I knew you were going to do it for 4. Okay, that's a conspiracy. So, but then you have conspiracy theories about things like this, like Do you think the British knew that the Germans were trying to get the Mexicans to declare war on the U.S.? Do you think the British knew before they decoded that Zimmerman telegram? Do you think the British, so when the British got this telegram and then they decoded it, translated it from 3 different languages, got it into English, and it looked, oh, the Germans are trying to make an alliance with Mexico to hurt the U.S. Huh. Do you think that before they got that message, they knew that that message was out there?
Yes, because they were already tapping the other sea.
So they were tapping it.
Yeah,
they were spying on the Germans. But you might just say they're spying on the Germans for every kind of information. But they were willing to tap.
I think it's just like a right place and right time.
So they kind of may have been thinking, we need every kind of information. So we know that they held the information when they got it. Well, that's sort of a conspiracy. They held Germans, Mexicans, they know about it. But why did they wait? Well, from our standpoint, they're in the conspiracy. In a way. Wait, bad guy, gonna do something to us. Good guy, ally, knows about that and does nothing until now. Why didn't you tell me right away? Because they know better than we do. Yeah.
But that also means, Mexico did since they received it also. Did they receive it at all?
Did they receive it?
Yeah, like was it like intercept? Was it simply they listened in on it, or they took it before it reached Mexico?
That's a good point. They intercepted it.
Okay, so Mexico did not receive it at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mexico did.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll let you know.
If Mexico didn't act on it for several months, then they probably would have.
I don't know what we should do about this. It was kind of a joke kind of a thing too. Like, I mean, it's a real thing, but sort of in terms of capabilities, it was kind of a
sitting on a letter for 3 weeks. Britain's also sitting on the same letter, and Germany's on waiting for someone to respond.
Yeah.
It's like I text a girl.
So anyway, this is kind of a things to think about when you look at it. So it's cynically like Americans are all ready to join, and if you've done some American history, you remember that we got into other wars before this, sometimes manipulated by information and the press. And this is a little bit more important war, larger, but if you think about it, it's a long way away from the United States, and we really weren't threatened in the same way. So, but by 1917, the United States public was sort of wanting to help, and so we just needed something to give us justification, which is kind of sad to think of it like that. You want to be patriotic, and they're patriotic. Most people are patriotic. They want the best for their country. But when they hear certain news, sometimes it makes them overly patriotic, or sometimes the news can go the other way and say, patriotism is nothing. You're a fool. And that can be both ways. You can be manipulated. And that's what, as adults, we need to learn. When the press is saying, bad, that guy, them, those people, that is so bad. What's the other side of it? Just, you need to know the other side. There is always a side. There's Hitler, just take the extreme. Hitler was really, really bad. So, okay, is there any other side? Yes, there's a lot of sides, even to him. I'm not saying that there's good and there's bad, so he's in the middle. Maybe. And educated people can make that judgment. If you're uneducated, don't rely on media or somebody or some book, one source. Hitler was the worst of all time. Maybe. And we're going to do a lot of investigating about that particular.
Maybe the millions of Germans served him and saluted him and did everything for him for
Yeah.
years.
So there's a lot of angles to everything, even something that polarizing, or not polarizing, that extremely bad, according to most people. Yeah, it does. It comes down to, but you to make a decision like that. This is a really bad hat, a visor. It's a really bad hat, but it's a decent. It's a bad visor too. You know, well, how do we know? There's only one right here. Where's your visor? You know, I've seen a lot of visors. I've worn a lot of visors. You know, okay, that gives me some experience. I have some sources. They sell better visors now. Have you seen that? You know, there's a lot of ways of looking at things, even this. And so you would never just say, I saw in history class the greatest visor of all time. And then you go buy this same one. I mean, you might, but not if this is your first one that you've seen. Let's just do some investigation before you just go and buy the first visor you see that duplicates. So you would never do that with a visor, really. I mean, maybe because it's cheap and it's just you're just fooling around. But if you won't do that with a visor, then don't do that with something like this is really bad and we need to go to war. Don't do that. Watch out. Don't yell at your neighbor when you don't know exactly what's going on. Hey neighbor, I hate you. You would never do that. Now think about it for a while before you attack your neighbor. Neighbors are like Belgium and France in terms of armies, you know, in terms of countries. So you would never do that with your next door neighbor. But why did Germany do that with their next door neighbor? Right? Okay. And so if we have a president from time to time and say, well, you know, they're doing this to it. For example, it's a real, give me 90 seconds. In 1992, okay. First of all, let me back up a little bit more. In 1990, a long time before you guys were born, there was one country in the Middle East invaded another country. We came to the help of the one that was invaded. Kuwait was invaded by Iraq. We, United States, real patriotic, we went and helped Kuwait, helped them win a war, and they liberated their country. Iraq, crazy country, and they then got really mad at us. They started saying, we've got weapons of mass destruction that we're going to use on our own people. And they did. They got mad at us and all the world for doing that to them. And so they started killing their own people with chemical weapons of mass destruction. So when they did that, did they have chemical weapons of mass destruction? Yeah, because they killed their own people with those. So, okay, that's how you prove things. Do I, in fact, have a visor? Yes. Okay. But now here, did I have a visor? Yeah, that's the same one. Okay. When they used chemical weapons of mass destruction on their own people, they had them when they did that. Now, some months go by. Did they have them? Do they still have them? Really? You don't know. Yeah, this is not like, okay, It's not a hat, because here's the hat. Now, do I have a hat? Do I have a visor? It's right down there. It's hidden. Now, to you said no, because you don't see it. But you're trying to be right. And this is even simpler than you're thinking. But it's just down here. Okay, what if I throw it out the door? Do I still have a visor? Yes, it's right out there. You don't see it anymore. So there's a lot of ways of looking at things. Did the Germans have this information? Did the Mexicans? I don't know. But who's manipulated through the whole thing? People. Well, do we like being manipulated? Well, maybe. Maybe. Because we got to get in there and hit them. It was already practically at the end of the war. And we,
I mean, Twitter does exist, so maybe we do like it.
Okay, so in 1992, we said they had weapons of mass destruction. And they said, yeah, we did, but not anymore. And so we said, they definitely. And it lasted a long time, for like 10 years, talking about it. Finally, the United States was, most people like you and me were just saying, they had him, I don't know, watch out for him. He's crazy, he's a dictator. Saddam Hussein. Then something happened, and it was on September 11th. And what happened?
Trade centers and
They knocked down our buildings. It was terrorists from the Middle East. And most Americans and Democrats are really, really patriotic. And they, God, I can't believe it. Let's come together. Let's defend our country. I can't believe this. Who was that did this? And so we started tracking it down, and it was terrorist organizations in the Middle East. And they had some shady ties that were into that country of Iraq, but not really. And so, but we got a big army together. We went to Afghanistan, and looked for those terrorist people, and we got most of them, and we found out where Osama bin Laden, the chief terrorist, is. And he's in a cave, and they couldn't really get him, but they know he was in Afghanistan. So, okay, we got them. We changed the government of Afghanistan. And then we even went a little bit further and said, and then Iraq. Remember Iraq? Remember we had that war, and they had the weapons of mass destruction. And most Americans, like half Americans now, half of them, me too, Mr. Downey too, was thinking, okay, wait, put this together. Saddam Hussein in Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Yes? Terrorists in the Middle East attacked us by hijacking airplanes and ran into buildings. Point two. What might happen now? What might happen to combine that? Terrorist guy, instead of just getting on an airplane and getting control of the airplane and crashing, dork terrorist has a bomb in here, weapon of mass destruction. And where did he get that? Who had weapons of mass destruction? The Iraq people. The Iraq guy gives it to this guy. He goes, hijacks an airplane, or hijacks a train or a bus, and blows up himself. And now it's a chemical weapon like the coronavirus, whatever. And it goes all around New York City. So what should U.S. do? What do we do? Nothing? Okay, fight back. So how do you, one thing is, okay, you could defend yourself. In other words, search everybody's bag. Everybody has to take their shoes off, even old ladies in Georgia, which is really stupid. Like, where are the real terrorists? Like, where are the potential real people? Like, the people those 19 people who got on the airplanes, they don't look like Granny. And they don't look like, an Indian or a Mexican either. They look a certain way. They speak a certain language, right? Those are the people. But okay, what else can you do? What could the president do? And what did we do?
Didn't we invade Iraq?
We invaded Iraq again. We invaded with a gigantic army and went back into Iraq and got that dictator and captured him, and his own people gave him a trial and they killed him. We changed their government, and we just thought we had a handle there. So we went there in 2003, and we were there about 8 years, and it was all kinds of problems. Like in that battle, in that war, we lost about, I want to say like casualties, like 1,000 people. 1,000. But since then, those 8 years after that, we lost like 40,000 people. It was, and how did they lose there after the war? Well, there's a guy who comes over the bag and says, "Are y'all Americans?" Boom! Like that. Like, and there's like children with a bag, or the ladies, in Iraq. Okay, so we had a whole big problem with that. And so eventually we got another president to say, "I will never do that again." So when he came into presidency, he came and took all the people out of Iraq. All of our people, all of our army. People said, "Phew, okay, now we're out of there." And then it started another thing. It's called ISIS. ISIS. Remember that? And so that came because there was no American army anywhere near, and there was no Iraqi army either, and they took over a lot of Iraq and Syria and causing all kinds of problems. You might have heard about this about 5 years ago. Well, then we got another president who went after those people. And now those people are gone. Okay, so there's a lot of manipulation and a lot of, maybe we shouldn't have done this or this or this or this. Why couldn't have we just like cut to the end and like, don't go over in there? But you have to go back to patriotism. You got to go back to like, we were hit in Washington, D.C., in the World Trade Center, and everybody's passionate, and everybody, even Democrats, are like, we got to do something. And what?
Did you see
Washington, D.C.? Yeah, hit it. One of those planes that they hijacked.
Oh, yeah, that was. I'll take about the time.
Yeah, the two towers, and then the Washington, D.C. one, and then one was going to Washington.
Went to one Pentagon and one headed towards the White House.
Yeah, that last one, yeah. So yeah, came from Boston, New York, I think, and went out and came back. Yeah. So sometimes it gets, sometimes you see, they're sinking our ships. Lusitania, the passenger ship. I mean, why are you going on a passenger ship over to Germany right now anyway? It's a war. It's the World War. I think I'll go to Germany today. It's something funny about that. Anyway, it's kind of funny.
I love conversion.
I think I'll go to Belgium. You want to go to Belgium? Go to Belgium?
Let's go to Ukraine, guys. The weather's great there.
Center of the most dangerous war happening.
I want to go visit Aunt Mabel in England. There's a world war and they're sinking ships over there.
Let's go visit the Mars, guys.
Yeah.
I heard there's some nice rain down there.
You guys are good. Okay. So April the 2nd, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war, and they did. Main contribution and fame of the American Army. This is like as brief as you can get it. In the last year of the war, which is what year?
1918.
Defended against the Germans, and then it also led the attack against the Germans that brought the war to the end. Do you guys remember from your notes what are the major battles and campaigns of the United States? What was the broader campaign? What?
100 days.
The 100 Days was the broad campaign. In other words, it's kind of like the last 100 days of the war. The autumn, summer and autumn, 1918.
Battle of Wood.
Yeah, Belleau Wood. So just jot down what you think, and we'll come to it.
Wow.
Yeah. Which one? I'll put it up. Let's just hold off. I'll put it up. Okay. And then at the very end there, let's just fill in the League of Nations Versailles. Okay, let's hold off for that too. Hold off for that because I have one little line and we have a lot of space there. We can basically those are some things that you already looked at. You already submitted. So let's see if we can go back to the specifics of sort of the second half of the war. First part, a theme here for our class is the first part of the war is really more crucial than the second part in terms of like who's going to win, who's going to lose. It really all came. It was pretty much, you can see like from after the Battle of the Marne, not much changed on the Western Front, and then probably after the Battle of Tannenberg, not really that much changed. There was no way Russia was going to win that war after they lost at Tannenberg, the first year of the war. And the same, no way Germany was going to win after the first year. Pretty much, I don't think you can really point to say, if they hadn't sunk the Lusitania, maybe Germany actually could have defeated the Allies if the United States had not been there. That is an argument. Maybe it's a long shot, but it's a better shot than they had before. And did they get close? They're pretty close in 1914. 1918 was not quite as close, but so if you take the U.S. out of the defense, they might have gotten it. Then again, everybody paces themselves. You kind of pace yourself. You know what pace means? Like, I don't know. If we had a class and just these two ladies were here, and everybody else was sick, we're talking about things, you kind of expect I'm going to ask you some questions. There's only two people, and kind of like you're expected to say a little bit more. But when there's 20 people, you kind of might get away with never even opening your mouth. And you know that. And so that's the way you do war, that's the way you do business, that's the way you do things. That's how you drive. If you're the only person on the road, you just, I'm literally I'm the only one on the road, You know what I'm saying? And so you do the war like that too. And so the Americans are here. All right, well, they're not going to take it now. So I'm not just going to wait. Delay, because we got the Americans as the backstop. Okay. But if the Americans weren't there, like, we don't have a backstop. Hold, So the Germans did really well in that final offensive in 1918 because they kind of let them go at the beginning. Why in 1918? What happened in 16 and 17? In 15? I didn't get anywhere, Yeah, but they were on the other side. They were on the Eastern Front. But still, you understand that point. You kind of work with what you have. So, okay, I'm going to just, you guys get back to your notes and fill in anything that you're lacking. Now, we haven't talked about this is really the second year, but the Eastern Front in general. We talked about it, and then that first winter was when they lost a lot of ground. And I just want to show, at the very beginning. So this is still the first year, from August to August. That's where the Russians were really neutralized, and the Germans got control of that whole Eastern Front, and really never lost control. The Austrians, we talked about this. The Austrians were really like the third power. Russians could beat them, but the Germans could beat the Russians, and that's the way the Eastern Front just worked. Germany could do pretty much what it wanted, and Russia could do pretty much what it wanted against Austria only. But if Germany was there, it couldn't do anything. That's a generic way to understand the Eastern Front. The Western Front is much more. There's a lot of variables, and basically nobody could do anything against anyone. After that first year. I mean, there were some successes, and you might could have said, well, if they had done Verdun longer and they hadn't attacked, that's just pinpricking at this sort of a failed strategy. You could improve on the failure, but you're not going to have success. But there was success on the Eastern Front. The Germans had success against Russia. Russia had success against Austria. Was it strategic success? Not really, but tactical success. Now, all of this, I'm just kind of, the reason why I'm kind of redundant on a lot of this and giving, it's kind of educating you on just how you talk about wars and things. Because this war, World War I, is the least dynamic of one of the major wars. I mean, we're trying to understand the details of it. Oh, they're trying to do this and they're trying to do this. But really, if you look at it as a Martian would from way up from Mars, they just do nothing. They're just like, okay? Because in World War II, it's going to be completely different. And that's what makes it so surprising, so unique, that war. And the strategy, the tactics, and so many things.
Videos of like World War I fronts and the movement, which is like first year and everything moves.
Yeah,
and then World War II, Germany just like blows up, and then slowly they're picking away at Germany and trying to get it back down.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah, you mean just blow, extend,
and then almost get to Europe.
That's right.
Russia, like,
yeah. Okay, so I've got some things underlined here. Basically, what we just said. You can see how the Eastern Front had this bulge at the very beginning, and the Germans straightened that out, and that becomes the Eastern Front. Pretty straight, very broad. Germans in control. Now they don't get near Moscow. They probably could have taken Moscow. They probably could have taken St. Petersburg if they only had a one front. But that doesn't really make sense to say if, because they didn't, and they weren't about to not have a second front. Couldn't just say time out, France. Okay, let's not do it. I'm going after Russia. France wasn't going to do that, and Russia wasn't going to hold off either. So the alliance, on one hand, you say, how did this whole thing get started? It's kind of really stupid, a lot of stupid diplomacy, a lot of all that entangled alliances and everything. But on the other hand, even though it was entangled in kind of stupid alliances, they were faithful. Except for Italy, they were faithful to those alliances. Even Russia was faithful. Yeah, so kind of funny. So here's how the Eastern Front was with this bulge into Poland, but when the Germans did their thing, it got straightened down to Romania, from Latvia to Romania. We talked about this battle. Okay, down in the south is the battle of Przemysl. Basically, this is a series of battles over in a place called Galicia. Remember the region of Galicia? And it's in the Carpathian Mountains. And basically, the Russians came in there and held it for a while. And then they would lose it and get it back. And it was a lot of sieges, in other words, bombarding the city. And then eventually the Austrians had to evacuate. Today, that is a city in Poland. It's down here. Yeah. So by the second year of the war, remember that Nikolasha, the head of the Russian army, he was retired. And the Tsar had the great idea of replacing him with himself. So this is a strategic blunder, really, but it's kind of like they're trying to manipulate the patriotism of Russia to get behind the war or stay behind the war at all costs. And even the Tsar is fighting at the front. And so, but the problem is the Tsar has never been in a battle, never been in a war, never really done anything, doesn't have any expertise. And so he's probably even worse than Nikolasha. So no military experience, little success, and he lasted all the way until for 2 years he was at the front. I mean, he'd come home for holidays and stuff. But this was a disaster. We're going to talk a lot about this because this leads to the Russian Revolution and the communist takeover of Russia. Is the Tsar, and we'll talk about this, but at length, the Tsar makes the blunder of he's going to take over the war, and he doesn't know the first thing about it. So you're going to lose the war like that, or you're not going to do very well. And he did have some generals who were decent, like Brucilla and Alexeyev, and then Brucilla was the best one and had some success. But when he goes to the front, the government in St. Petersburg two things are going to fall apart, the war and the government. And we're going to talk about that in detail. So 2 million Russian troops were lost during the course of that first full year. I mean, that's ridiculous. 2 million. I mean, we've talked about all the ludicrous numbers on all sides, but Russia probably has the worst of the numbers. Again, you can't look at maps too much just to get an idea of how many armies are there, but how it's straightened out.
Big old gap.
I mean, they had to put a lot of gaps in there because you can't cover that whole front. They had a hard time even in World War II covering the whole front. But probably the best thing that the Russians did in the war was that Brucilla offensive. And eventually, so that was in 1916, the summer of 1916. It's like their last gasp, but actually it was fairly well prepared for, unlike Annenberg and Masurian Lakes, the things that happened those first couple of years. By 1916, the Russians built up, and now you guys did work on this, so this is called the Brucilla Defensive, 1916. So anything that you might add to that is that this was the one true success of the Russians in the war that I might ask you. The details of it are basically, they were just much more prepared, and they did a bombardment, but they didn't do too much bombardment. They were well supplied, and they just moved quickly. And also what made it success is they're going against Austria. Don't try to entangle yourself with the Germans. And so it was some success. Of course, it was not a major strategic success. Strategic means it changes the whole war. If you could say World War I, what are the strategic battles? Like, what are the strategic battles? What are the ones that, like, that battle changed the whole war?
The whatever one that the U.S. fought that portion.
Okay, that was a strategic. That ended the spring offensive and the battle of, well, the Battle of Wood is the one that kind of like, God, the Americans are good. I mean, let's just start retreating. So they were like, this would. And so that was a strategic victory for the Allies. But what other ones? What are other ones?
The leak where they stopped.
Yeah.
Sleeping plan.
Yeah. So if you can stop the Schlieffen Plan, basically we can say in hindsight, if you stop the Schlieffen Plan, you're gonna win. And so how did they stop it? Oh, well, Liège did the delay, and then they made them alter and come to the Marne rather than to Paris. And so you could just say that Liège and the Marne together, that tells the whole story of the Western Front.
And
Say that again?
Tannenberg basically shut down Russia for the whole rest.
Yeah, and so that was a strategic. He didn't get their capital, didn't get Russia to surrender, but they were of no consequence after that. Brucilla, this offensive, after 2 years of let's prepare for an attack, one more attack, let's try. This was an effort to win back, at least try to knock Austria out of the war. And in some ways, that it was effective. Austria was neutralized, but then Russia used all of its strength on that one thing, on that one attack. So on one level, this Brucilla was strategic in that Austria gets knocked out, but so does Russia itself gets knocked out. Not much changed on the overall line of the Eastern Front. So they move in about this far, and then they have to retreat when the Germans come to relieve the Austrians. Now, part of the Eastern Front is in the far south of Europe. Far south down here is Romania, and the Romanians decide, hey, let's get into the war. About halfway through, and they join the Allies. They join the right side, but they join kind of like right when Russia was stirred up a nest of hornets, and the Germans are right there, and Bulgaria is right below Romania. So Romania joins, and they're already surrounded by the three of the Central Powers. Not to mention that Turkey is right there. So that's a hard one to figure out unless you're Romanian. Why did they join right at the wrong time? But they were trying to pick the right side, and they thought maybe now's the time we could be a pinprick in the side of the Central Powers. And they were pinprick, and that was it. So they quickly lost their country. And eventually, so Romania is down here, of course, it's the Black Sea. Bulgaria is here, Russia's here, Austria there. And they put up a very gallant effort to try to join with the Russians against the Austrians. But they're gonna, so right on this front, this is Austrian front, Serbian front, Serbia's over here. And Russia was not able to help. Bulgaria. Yeah, I mean, so you can see the advance of that front. It moves from the border into here, and there's a German Falkenhayn. The overall strategic commander is brought down into this front and to command the German army. So what's going to happen is not much of a mystery. The Germans are going to overrun Romania. Here they are about to go over the Danube River. Falkenhayn is leading Mackensen. Now, but all of those were on Western Front. So you can imagine the Germans who had fought on the Western Front, how they were at that bottleneck and just static trench warfare. When they came to a place like Romania, it was just so fun for them. They could maneuver and go fast, and overwhelming superiority in Romania, just back in the feudal ages kind of armies. So basically, last Russian success is the Brucilla, and it kind of coincides with the end of Romania. Of course, by 1917, there's troubles all around. Something to remember generally about World War I, that when somebody's telling you something, don't forget to be a good student and write. Of course, we're recording, but it's good to that's part of your thing, is not just to be a student and write as much as you can. But one of the basic things that often is misread about World War I is people know that Germany falls apart, Austria falls apart, they don't have a king and queen after that, and Russia, of course, goes communist, Romania fell apart, Bulgaria, all of these countries are going to fall apart except for Britain and France, the United States. But something that people think about it, well, Russia was so involved and they had a revolution, of course they're going to have problems. And people mutiny. Mutiny is when a military people just say, I'm not fighting anymore. I don't listen to the officer anymore. That's called a mutiny. Or revolt. Soldiers revolt, and I'm not gonna attack anymore. I'm not gonna do what they say. And that, if that starts, that's real hard to have any success. But the thing is, I don't know about the United States. There's a very, very, very little information, negative, or any information that there was mutiny in the American army. Well, we weren't in the war for very long, but all the other armies had mutinies, all of them, even British, even France. And there was also a lot of strikes, a lot of shortages, a lot of problems in the home front in France and Germany. Germany almost got out of the war many times. A lot of people think that it only happened in Russia, but it actually happened in a lot of countries. It definitely happened in Germany and Austria and France. And so we're going to talk about what happened with Russia, which was part of the Russian Revolution. And a lot of people think, well, Russia was so backward and they had the worst war experience, so of course they're going to go that way. But France had the same problems, and so did Germany, and they never got out of the war. So that's just something to remember. That's just something. They almost got out. France almost said, time out, I don't want to do this war. Almost. Italy also. So that's something to remember. Just looking at the Eastern Front. Eventually, Russia falls apart. I guess this might be a good time to just look generally at this. Maybe like a 2-minute break. Let me hand out something. This will help instead of giving this to you as a handout and you doing it on your own. I do have the homework loaded up on the board. Maybe something to do on Friday on Hitler during World War I, and then the end result. I have a handout I want to give to you guys. Not this one, but another one. This to take home and bring back next Tuesday. You can work with your own hand. Okay, on this. So when the United States was coming into the war, Russia was going out of the war. Just falling apart. So it's kind of like it's a +1 but a -1. And I don't know which one you'd rather have. I think if Russia had stayed in, the U.S. didn't come, I think probably the same thing would have happened. I mean, I'm not saying this definitively, but I'm just saying a lot of people think that. If both of them could have stayed in, of course, things would have been better for the whole world. But the U.S. is going to come in while the Russians are going out. Now, so this little handout right here is just kind of a broad look at, so what's going on? Russia went through revolutions. Now we're going to go through the details. This is not the details. This is just part, what happened during the war, trying to connect, like what happened to the Eastern Front. Well, Russia went through 2 revolutions. I have there in bold February, and then there's another one in October, Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 1, and Roman. They went through 2 revolutions. And the first one in February, now sometimes it's called the March Revolution because it actually did take place in March. Not to confuse you too much. But Russia was on a different calendar. They had the old Gregorian calendar, and so February was March, and so or like 10 days off. So anyway, so the end of October was actually, the end of October was actually November. The end of February was actually March. And so this February, March, we're going to go through the details, but just know that what happened was the Tsar, Nicholas II, the guy at the front, he abdicated. That means he quit. He said, okay, time out. I'm not going to be the king anymore. That's called abdicating. And so what that means is he's not the king. But everybody in the world is going to ask, well, if you're not the king, who's the king? Who's the Tsar? And he did something that was a little different. Was usually when he's not the Tsar, well, then the son is going to be the Tsar. And if then not the son, then another person that's next in line that's related. And so he knew that, and we're going to go through the details of this, but he abdicated, and he also advocated for his son. So they didn't have a Tsar. And that's crucial, and we're going to talk about that as we, in a couple of weeks after the break, we're going to go through the Russian Revolution in detail. That's our next big topic. But in what we're talking about here is why he abdicated, basically the war. So the Tsar abdicated. He also abdicated for his son. He was thought maybe his brother would be the king, the Tsar, but that person didn't want to be Tsar either. And so this means when the Tsar abdicated, it meant there was no king, there was no Tsar. And so they'd be there as provisional government. They had another government. It's called a temporary government or provisional government. And it was divided up into two. Okay, and so they had a government, and then they had a city government. Okay, we're going to go through this, but not now. Okay, but the thing to remember is that the government is falling apart. Okay, but they're trying to continue. They're trying to continue the war. Okay, so that Eastern Front is we're still in the war. Even though we don't have a king, we're going to continue the war. So the war policy continues. The Eastern Front is going to stay the same. Hopefully they can somehow defend Russia. Maybe we can pick on Austria again. Hopefully Germany won't attack us. So it's the same thing. Now, number two there, the Petrograd Soviet. Now that's the communist-controlled city government. Now they're against the war. So the provisional government, the official government, is for the war. But they have a city government who's against the war. It's sort of like in Portland today, in a way. They have a mayor of Portland, Oregon, who likes the riots and people burning stuff in the streets. And then you have a governor of Oregon who kind of likes that they're rioting and burning stuff in the streets. We have a president and people, in Alabama, people outside of Oregon who are saying, this is crazy. They ought to stop those things. What are they doing? Well, you see, so it's kind of like we have two different types of governments. And we've started our country like that. We have a federal government, but there's a national government and there's a local government. Local people are really the government. The local people are the people who clean up this. If I put this trash out here, people in Washington aren't going to clean this up. People first, if we stink up this place and burn this down, the church it's their responsibility. But if the church doesn't do it, then it's the local government's people. And if the local people won't clean up this stench, then it's the state government. And if they won't do it, then it's the national government. That's the way it works, and that's the way it works back in this time. So there's a city government right here of Russia, of the capital in St. Petersburg, who does not want the war to go on. Then there's the other government that does want it. So they're going to have a problem. You got two governments, and we're going to talk about that. Roman numeral 2, Germany hatches a secret plan. Now this is the key thing that changes world history. The goal of I won't go into this right now. Wait a second. Yeah. Okay, so Russia basically disintegrates, and then, so here's the thing. Germany hatches a secret plan to get Russia out of the war. What is the goal? To get Russia out of the war. And why does Germany want Russia out of the war? That's right. If you don't have a two-front, to only have one front. And then what's the goal of that? So they can just get Paris. And then supposedly win the whole thing. So that's the goal, is to get Russia out of the war by somehow getting them out of the war to stop, so they can win on the Western Front only, instead of having a two-front war. So the plan is, how do you get Russia out of the war? For 3 years we've been trying to kill them and win the battles. And we're doing pretty well, but they're still in the war. The Tsar abdicated, and they're still in the war. We got so lucky that they don't even have a king, and they're still in the war, though. So they have a plan. Here's the plan. well, first, the detail, the general idea on here is start a revolution in Russia. Communist revolution. They let them go crazy. And then, because we know that, now you and I know which part of their government is against the war? The city government. So if we can somehow get a revolution started in St. Petersburg, they're already against the war. If we can get a revolution started there, they'll get out of the war. They'll just say, war's bad and we'll just end it. And Germany will say, thank you. Now I'm going after France with everything I've got. I get them and then I'll win and then I'll deal with Russia later. You know, that's the whole point of the sleeping plan is knock France out and then we'll deal with Russia. Right? But so now they're like, okay, let's go back to square one. Let's do the sleeping plan, but you only have one front. How do you get the one front? Russia, get out of the war. Okay, you don't want to? Okay, we fight you. You don't want to get out of the war. Okay. Start a revolution. Okay, now, back to the sleeping plan. That's sort of why the 1918, that spring offensive actually almost worked in 1918. Because they only had that one front. Okay. So the details of starting a revolution is they send from, didn't pick up this map, from Zurich, Switzerland, was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, Lenin, was in Switzerland. And he was a very famous communist writer and agitator, revolutionary, professional revolutionary. Never really had a job. He's someone who just revolution, and people donated to him, and he gets money out of thin air, and because there's people that will donate to something to start riots in Portland. So he's like that. He's like those kind of people. Okay, and so they put him on a German train. Now this is during World War I, right? This is this is the summer of 1917. Sorry, April of 1917. It goes like this. Across here, they're on a train, stops many times, takes a couple of weeks, and finally through Finland and into the capital. It was like a rat, like a poison. And they know, okay, it's not just Lenin, but a whole bunch of people. Lenin, Stalin, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Trotsky, all the people that those will be household names for you. Those are the people that are going to start the revolution in Russia. So, it's very interesting if you are a Russian today, or if you were a German today, and you're thinking about this, and when you and I talked about the Zimmerman telegram, and you and I talked about Lusitania and all that, how that's kind of manipulated. If you were a Russian, or if you were a German student, and you're learning about this, how might you see this? It's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, it is kind of embarrassing. It's kind of like this little thing that and this is going to change world history. This is going to change everything. It's going to make, somehow Mr. Biden is socialist. A guy like that is not, how did he get that idea? Well, let's go back to here. Like, come on, American running for president? Like, surely. How did that catch on? Well, it catch on because it caught on in Russia. How did it catch on? Well, we're going to talk about it. But how did it even get started? The Russians were not communists. Well, there's one city they were open to it. They were sympathetic.
Germany tried to destroy the whole country. The whole country fell for it.
Well, okay, so who was responsible for Lenin, the socialist, the communist, to get here? Germany. Germany did it. Did the Russians know about it? Nobody knew about it in Russia. Nobody, except for the communist people. And it was like, we're talking about very few people. Very few people. So conspiracy. Yes, that's right. So if anything's a conspiracy theory, well, first of all, this is a conspiracy. And so this is very prevalent today in Germany and in Russia and people your age. My age, we were brainwashed about something else. And so you guys are open, your generation is open. Unfortunately, Americans, what's weird about world things in the world and Western civilization today is people in America, students like you are the ones being brainwashed, not you. The people in the schools that they don't learn this. They learn World War I for like 30 minutes. They just killed each other, and then there was a great revolution in Russia, and then there was Hitler, and then it was, it's really like jumping over the real important things. It's like, how did this happen? Where did this come from? How did Lenin get to Russia in the first place? The Germans did it. Now, I don't believe this conspiracy. There was a real conspiracy. Hindenburg and Ludendorff and the Kaiser said, we've got to get Russia out of the war. And some people said, there's revolutionaries in Zurich. So we give them $1 million, we get them to Russia, and they'll start a revolution. And they were so desperate, they said, give them $1 million. Give them $1 million. Because how else are we going to win? We gotta have a one-front war. We've tried fighting them for 3 years, and we beat them on every single battle, but we can't do much. Because we have two fronts, right? We ask them to give up. They're not going to give up. They don't even have a czar, and they don't give up. Okay. But the thing is, they have no government. The czar's gone. You slip this rat, this poisonous rat, this roach from Zurich into St. Petersburg, and they got him. Hindenburg and Ludendorff and the Kaiser. We don't have for sure about this, but a lot of people, conspiracy theorists, they interviewed. They knew about it. What do you promise to do? And Lenin said, take over Russia. And do this and this and this. And what do you promise to do when it's going to be a communist? We're going to transform that whole society. Yeah, but what are you going to do right away? We're going to get out of the war first. This and this. I don't care about all that. You're going to get out of the war. You promised to get out of the war. We're going to give you $1 million. We're going to send you and your compatriots over there. And you start that war. And you say, well, I might need $50,000 a month. You get $100,000 a month. There's no question about it. They funded Lenin for over several years. The Germans did. The Russian communists had no money. Germans gave them millions upon millions of dollars. Why? To win the war. Now, I want you to think, what do the 16 or 20-year-old German and Russian students of this, what are they thinking? It's embarrassing, but do you know who changed Russia? It was the Germans. People are, I'm not into this. People are absolutely convinced that Vladimir Lenin, the father of communism, the father of all of this that we're talking about, that if you as you go into society and politics, and he's going to be on the debate tonight. Mr. Trump's going to call him communist, and he's going to have to defend it, or they're going to be calling each other stuff. But why? You calling him? We're in 2020, and they're talking about communism. Yes, because those people that are in Portland are saying, "I am communist. We're going to take over Portland and then Oregon and everything. We're going to knock down Jefferson's memorial and everything. We're starting over, like Lenin. That's their hero." And people do not understand that. Like, they're either bluffing, but or they're real, or they're lunatics. But I mean, they're. This is a long time ago. This is the strangest thing. Russia went through a revolution. They killed people. They did all this stuff. They did this. And then every single Russian said, that was so bad, it was a nightmare, don't ever do that again. But here in America, we're like tinkering with it. It's really stupid. But here's the thing. Where did it start from? That great idea was actually Hindenburg and Ludendorff. We're just trying to win the war. They underestimated him. No, they gave him $1 million. and thousands, millions. So they underestimated him in a way for the world, but they rightly estimated that he's going to get them out of the war. And that is a crucial moment in world history. You understand? And it all came like a fluke. You understand how a fluke it is? It's like the Germans were just, but there are people in Russia, I promise you, they are convinced that Lenin was a German agent, a spy through and through. That's all he was. It was a conspiracy for Germany to start world revolution, communism, in the middle of World War I. And it succeeded. There are people that are convinced. Now, most Americans that go through high school and college, never heard this conversation. Never heard this conversation. That's why your parents are smart. They understand, like, I want to get to the heart of something. It's not just fact. Now, we've done a lot of stuff, a lot of battles and stuff, and I know that's not a typical thing outside of college either, even in a normal college, but it's calculated for you to do that. You understand? It's gonna I'm not gonna test you on every single detail, but there's a purpose about that. So just bear with me on those kinds of things. Okay, on this outline so the goal, the goal. The plan, now there's a greater plan, but the details of the plan is they're going to send Lenin, the communist leaders, to start a revolution. Okay, that revolution, fast forward through it, which we're going to go through the details, so hold your horses on that for a couple of weeks. The Bolshevik coup, that's Lenin's party, the Bolsheviks. And that just means the majority party, the Bolsheviks, they call themselves, topples that government. And the leaders, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, people like that. And so then what did they do? They got out of the war. We're going to talk about the other things that they promised and they followed through, and the things, the bad things, the good things, all that. But the main thing for our discussion about World War I is they took over the government, and within a few months, they got Russia out of the war. And so was that millions of dollars paid off for the Germans? Yes. And like, man, this is amazing. This is better than the Schlieffen Plan. Now, it would never have happened if you had done it in 1914. You send him back in 1914, they shoot him. They shoot Lenin. I mean, Lenin had been in jail many times. Why was he in Switzerland? Because they were going to throw him in jail, so he was hiding there. In fact, when World War I was going on, Lenin, the father of communism, basically said to himself and his wife, they lived like bums in Zurich. They lived by somebody brings them some food and they eat it, and they live very miserably. And he said and wrote to people in Russia, like, well, I won't live to see anything of revolution in Russia. There's no way. Then, like 2 weeks later, the Germans sent him a note, come to the military office, the espionage affairs and things. And like, out of nowhere, it's like a miracle for him. Like, you want me to go back to Russia? He didn't even know what was going on in Russia. He literally, Lenin in Switzerland, didn't even really know that the Tsar had abdicated at that, when it happened. He learned about it a month later. So most people think that, Russia was so bad, they all wanted to go communist, and Lenin came, and Lenin got all the people, and everybody just, we're going to take over the car. Nothing like that. This is Germans during the war, slipped him in. They put him in a train and came in at night, and only the communists knew about it. Like, he is crazy. In fact, the government of Russia said the communists, they didn't really call them communists, they called them the German spies. And most people say it's just nothing but a German spy. And if you look at it as a Martian might, instead of somebody who's hoping for good information like in our colleges, like, this is us. Everybody loved him. No, nobody knew who he was. Nobody loved him. Now they love him. not in Russia. Only the United States, who know nothing about it. Okay, so the Bolshevik coup topples the government, communist leaders, the Eastern Front falls apart. The Germans take over a lot of Ukraine, Baltic states, Poland, and Crimea, it pushes the Eastern Front even farther. And so at this point, the Russians, the communists, Lenin and Trotsky, which you guys did some work on this, they made peace with Germany and said, okay, I'm out. Don't take Moscow and St. Petersburg. And the Germans are just plowing through because when the communists take over, the army just falls apart. In fact, something that you should know, the first thing that when the Tsar abdicated, first thing, and we'll come back to this, the first law that the Russian government passed was that the officers are no longer in charge of the soldiers. So right there you go, your whole army's gonna fall apart. You understand? And they also said the officers can't have pistols, they can't have arms, they can't have a sidearm. So they're not in charge and they can't shoot you. So there's no army left. And so you're just asking for a problem, and they got it. And then the communists came in and made it even worse. And they said, okay, everybody. Oh, we'll talk about that. So anyway, the Eastern Front falls apart. Germany occupies large swaths of territory. And then the communists sign the treaty. The Brest-Litovsk Treaty. There's a city right in here called Brest, and today it's in Belarus. And that's strategic because now Russia's out of the war, obviously, and then so Germany has a free hand in the Western Front. Germany begins to shift all its armies from east to west, which is exactly what they wish they could have done at the very beginning. Remember that first question, or one of those two questions, like, wait, why are we declaring war on Russia when we're actually going to fight in France? You know, this is like, okay, we're back to that point, 4 years prior. So if you were Germany at the beginning, sort of towards the beginning of the war, towards the middle of the war, or this is what they actually got. Pretty decent. This is all Ukraine right here today. Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland's right here. You know, this is Hungary right here, Slovakia, Romania. Does that make sense? Any questions, comments? Something that I want you to do for homework. Let me give everybody this. Take this outline. Now this is the end results of the war. And I want you to write with your own hand and bring this next Tuesday. Looking at this, the end results of the war. So what I want you to do, this is real basic information. You can get this from Wikipedia, you can get this from a lot of places. And some of this you actually already have done. But what you want to do is, hey, give me just a sec and I'll let you guys go, what you want to do is go through here, the end results of the main powers, Germany, Austria, you know, it's got them listed there. You want to just say, what happened to that? What happened to them? For example, we just said Russia. Russia went communist, and they lost their entire empire. You know, it went communist. So you don't need to say how many casualties. This is not that. This is what we're talking about as the political results. Up at the top, basically, you're saying what is the armistice, that the name of that treaty, and the date of the armistice that ended the war. And then the main architects of that treaty. Of course, we're talking about Versailles. And there's 4 individuals that you need to list there. So it's the big 4, the number 4, the big 4. Okay, I'll let you guys go like that. Let's see, Miss Logan, Miss Thornton, Miss Ramsey, there's some old things up here. Yeah, go ahead. See you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.